Many thanks for staying with us on Village Square Africa. Now, we are still going to go into our conversation, but very quickly, we just want to let you know that we here at News Central are monitoring the World Economic Forum that is currently going on in Davos, and we have a session going on. And Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is a former Minister of Finance in Nigeria, and of course the current Director General of the World Trade Organization, is also part of that session, and we're going to be linking to her very shortly. We'll take a look at what she has to say, and then we'll be back to continue VSA.
And impacts global
but
growth
going
and
into
back.
this year, we were
Makes
more
us less,
optimistic,
less
and we projected
about the
3.3%.
but I think
the
we'll come
concerns
in below that.
about
We're
what is
revising our
happening
forecast, so I don't
in
have
the
the
Red
new
Sea,
numbers. Nevertheless, it's still better
Suez
than
Canal,
last year.
and elsewhere in
and
the
you
world.
talked
People
about
also forget
how do we
that climate change
make
concerns,
trade
drought in the
contribute
Panama
more. We
Canal
are quite
also
optimistic on that contribution,
so
because there are some bright spots in trade. We've got digital, we've got services growing.
Global growth.
Actually, services
also
grew
has
for
an
the
impact
first
on
9
trade.
months
So
of
trade,
last year.
it's
It's like a annualized rate of
impacts
about
global
9%.
growth and back.
And within that,
Makes us
digitally delivered
slightly less
services growing
optimistic
very, very
about
fast.
the 3.3%.
We're also bullish
we'll
about green trade.
Below that, we're revising
over
our
the
forecast,
past
so I don't have the new
2
numbers.
decades, green trade has
still
tripled
better
to about
last year.
1.9 trillion.
And you talked about
so I think
how do
services,
we
digital
make
trade, green trade
contribute more.
These are some
we
of
are
the
quite
areas that we need
optimistic
to
on
look
that
at. So what should we
because
do?
there are some
On
bright
the
spots in
investment
trade.
side, we're negotiating an investment facilitation agreement. Actually, at the WTO with 110 countries.
9 months
the
of
idea
last
is
year
to
at
have
an annualized rate
developing
of about
countries
9%.
as much as possible
And within
sweep
that,
away those
digitally
barriers.
Well, that was Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala at the World Economic Forum going on in Davos, where they're talking about economic development generally across board, which has become a global concern, and definitely the different measures that are being taken. Now, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was the former finance minister in Nigeria, and of course, the current Director General of the World Trade Organization. But we'll get straight to our conversation. Now, I did say that in case you want to say that the federal government does not exactly notice what is happening in Nigeria, well, the FEC, which is the Federal Executive Council, has expressed worry over the rising cost of goods and services in the country. And this is coming right after the President, Bola Tinubu, mandated the Presidential Council on Industrial Revitalization, as well as the Presidential Council on Fiscal Reform and Tax Policy Review, to fast-track the reports and the reviews and come up quickly with their recommendations, so the real sector and, of course, the citizens could begin to feel the impact of the renewed hope agenda. And the question is, do people still have hope? The attention of these councils has been drawn to the rising cost of goods and services in the country, as well as the rising cost of doing business in the country. But also, they seem to have noted the excitement and optimism of the real sector that the renewed hope agenda will bring a prosperous 2024. Now, that said, I'm joined by my guest today who will help us make sense of the situation, and we'll find out if at all the people still have hope, especially in the economy of Nigeria. Joining us to have this conversation is Basil Abia, the co-founder of Veriv Africa in Abuja. Thank you so much, Basil, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Blessings. It's a pleasure and privilege to be on News Central TV this afternoon.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you join us again, and it really is a good thing that you remember names. I did say that to you off air, but anyways, I'm talking about
that's my New Year resolution, actually.
Oh, I don't know if it's more of a resolution thing or a retentive memory thing.
Yeah, but I'm really bad with names.
Well, that means E for effort. I like the effort. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll definitely go into the conversation, Basil, but we have Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala currently at the Economic Forum going on at Davos, and we're definitely going to be joining her to speak about it very shortly, and then we'll come back to continue the conversation. We have, at the World Economic Forum, I think it's been on for like 2 days, and we've had different representatives around the globe talking about how to boost the economy, because, of course, Nigeria is not the only country. I mean, we're talking about the Federal Executive Executive Council noticing the rising cost of goods and services and the rising cost of buying in Nigeria. So Nigeria is not the only country that is experiencing economic decline. A lot of countries are struggling with the economy, especially in Africa. So it's a good thing that we have people who represent our interests. And of course, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is one of such, seeing how she's the Director General of the World Trade Organization. But we will definitely go to hear what she's saying about the economy around the globe. But in the meantime, we're talking about the Federal Executive Council's attention that has been drawn to the rising cost of goods and services. I still have with me Basil Abia, the co-founder, Veriv Africa Abuja. Now, Basil, first off, I'd like to start by asking, what is your opinion on the rising cost of goods and services in the country as at this moment?
My opinion is largely, first and foremost, that food inflation is not a monetary supply issue. It's a cost push inflation type of issue. And what I mean by that is that the cost of production has marginally increased in the last 24 months. In fact, it has been on the increase since the announcement of the land border closure, that land border closure policy in 2019 by the erstwhile President Muhammadu Buhari. And since then, if you look at the inflation statistics, especially with regards to food inflation, it has been on a stark high. I'm not sure I've ever, since 2019, I've seen a dip or kind of like a plateau on the food inflation graphs. And that's because of a number of factors. First and foremost, I'd like to highlight that 51% of the calculation methodology of inflation, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, is dominated by food prices. So that means that if you're not attacking or trying to find a way to curb food inflation, then your headline inflation is going to be on the increase. On Monday, the NBS reported their new inflation numbers for December. Of course, as you do know, December is a very festive period for the country. 28.92% was the headline inflation rate, and 33.93% was the food inflation rate. That means, of course, like I said, it proves my point that if you're not curbing food inflation, then headline inflation is going to be on the increase, regardless of what you do. Now, what are the causative factors? First and foremost, the cost of transportation. I'll give you statistics. According to a World Bank report, this was 7 or 8 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, over 90% of the logistics and people logistics, obviously, vehicular logistics and people logistics in Nigeria were carried out by our roads. So it means that if you're having 90% of all of the logistics in the country, in the food logistics, and 90% of them is carried by roads, then we have to now start to look at the transmission effect of PMS and diesel. A vast majority of the food lorries, the food trucks that take food from northern Nigeria to southern Nigeria and vice versa, from central Nigeria to southern Nigeria, and from central Nigeria to northern Nigeria, especially when it comes to the tubers, as you do know. We love our potatoes, we love our yams, and all of them come from north central. So all the other parts of Nigeria depend on central Nigeria for our food tubers. Now, our food tubers have seen a significant increase in the last 24 months, largely because the vehicles that we use to do the carriage or the logistics of these foodstuffs are powered or fueled by either PMS or diesel. And I'll give you very important numbers. First and foremost, in terms of diesel, we've seen a 33% increase in the last 12 months. This time last year, diesel was about 156 naira per liter. Now, diesel is about 1,126 naira per liter, if I'm not mistaken, according to numbers. Now you do the math for PMS. With the removal of fuel subsidy in May 2023, we have seen a significant increase of PMS prices from over the average of 206 naira to now venturing almost close to 700 naira. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 690 naira on average across board. How do we do our transportation of food when the food comes in from those parts to the cities? Obviously, you now need to use PMS-powered smaller lorries and smaller buses to take this foodstuff from the outer markets into the inner markets, where most Nigerians in the urban areas have to access to buy food. Now, with this significant increase in fuel that powers most of these vehicles, of course, the price transmission effect, if you did basic economics, basically means that that is going to be transmitted into food prices. There are also exogenous factors. Early last year, in January 2023, we saw, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war. And as we do know, the Russia-Ukraine part of the world is undoubtedly the breadbasket of the world. At least 30 to 40% of our grains, our key grains like wheat and sorghum and barley and malt, they come from that particular part of the world. We like to eat a lot of wheat-based products. We eat a lot of pasta in Nigeria, our spaghetti, our macaroni. We eat a lot of bread in Nigeria. Of course, that comes from the wheat that we imported. We saw a significant increase in those wheat prices, that saw a significant increase not only in our Indomie that is dominated obviously by wheat product, and in our pasta prices. You know, you wake up one morning and one pack of spaghetti is about 300 naira. The next morning, to get one pack of spaghetti is about 700 naira. All of these dynamics, they all form the basket of why food is on the increase. Food prices are on the increase. You know, the land border closure itself was to be, I think, economically cataclysmic in terms of policy implementation. Then you have, of course, the 48 ban items, by the CBN that were banned in terms of accessing foreign exchange to import them. Obviously, that has now been reneged by the Cardoso-led CBN government. It's going to take a while before we see price transmission or policy transmission into pricing. But that was a terrible policy that has led or has basically generated into the high food inflation rate that we have in this context. So I can go on and on as to the causative factors for food inflation prices, but I think that what I have said, aforementioned, of course, has led us to this particular precarious situation.
Very detailed indeed. Thank you so much, Basil, for that. Now, looking at all these issues in view, you have said that it's not just the monetary problem, right? So how does the FEC plan to address the rising cost of doing business in Nigeria if we're having to attack all of these from all these different issues that you've mentioned?
I think one low-hanging fruit, first and foremost, is to be able to ensure that the energy price situation that we have is sorted. I know that the entire country is dependent on one mega refinery in Lagos, the Dangote refinery, to kick off. I do not think that refinery in the medium term is going to reduce the price situation we have with energy. But energy is a huge causative factor for why food prices are very high. So we have to find very particular ways of containing that. And that means first and foremost, we have to be able to ensure that if we are really serious about our CNG, our mass CNG program, which there's a presidential committee on CNG, for instance, then we go all out to make sure that most of our lorries switch to CNG. And there is also the supply side sorted out. We have a lot of gas in Nigeria, as you do know, but the transmission pipeline for a lot of this gas has still not been instituted. I do know, of course, that the Ajaokuta, Kaduna, and Kano gas pipeline is currently under construction. That is going to take a while for us to get to. As you do note, just to give you another statistics, the gas transmission infrastructure in Nigeria is inadequate. We have just under 1,000 kilometers of gas pipeline piping from the Niger Delta to the inner parts of Nigeria. We will need to drastically increase that so that we can have CNG. And with more CNG, we have a variety of fuel sources that ensures that demand and supply actually plays a role in pricing for energy to reduce drastically. That obviously now helps the cost of production to reduce. Obviously, we have a multiple taxation problem. We have to be able to sort that on an immediate standpoint. We really need to. As an immediate policy imperative, we have to sort out the mass multiple taxation issue that we have. According to the statistics actually that I saw, over 250 taxes are basically dominate the tax regime right now for a lot of our manufacturing companies across Nigeria. In fact, I'll give you another statistics. 40%, according to the Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, 40% of their energy cost increase has been the situation in the last 12 years. So 40% of their pricing, their cost production increase is dominated by energy. So energy is a huge factor. Obviously, we have to sort out the dollar liquidity issue that we currently have. I know, for instance, that the federal government are working to get in at least $1.5 billion in the next 2 weeks to sort out the dollar scarcity situation. You need dollars to be able to import raw materials. If you're a manufacturer, a food manufacturer, That's very important. A number of other causative factors that you have to sort out. But I think lower-hanging fruit will be to ensure that first and foremost we get our CNG production on the up, our CNG transmission on the up. Secondly, you reduce the multiple taxation situation. Thirdly, very importantly, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but we import more food because we have a large food supply deficit. I'll give you a number. We have a 60 million metric ton supply deficit for chicken, which basically means that Nigerians are struggling to have their meals with protein. And if I give you another number, 45% of Nigerians do not eat any form of protein on a daily basis.
Okay, Basil, I would have really loved to stay with
crisis.
Basil. I'm sorry, I would have really loved to stay on that topic of importation, but I'm hoping that we can get to do that another day. But very quickly, because of our time here, we're talking about the renewed hope agenda, and we've been talking about that for a long time. But it seems as if the citizens have lost hope. So what can the federal government do and the FEC in this situation do to win back the trust of the people, or at least instill that hope that they so speak of?
Well, first and foremost, cut down the cost of governance. It's the simplest way to win the trust of Nigerians. You don't wake up one morning to go buy a tube of yam and then you notice a 25% increase over the last 1 week. And then when you put on your radio, you're listening to them talking about spending 10 billion on the residence of the vice president. 10 billion naira that can be used to ensure that we put more infrastructure in, especially when it comes to energy, for instance. More infrastructure for our gas pipeline. Of course, I know the 10 billion for a gas pipeline project is very minuscule, but it sends a message. You win trust to be able to carry out the hard policy decisions. A hard policy decision is the removal of subsidies so that you can spend that money that you hitherto would have spent on subsidizing energy on infrastructure, so that infrastructure equalizes the cost pricing effect for a lot of food products, especially when it comes to transmission. So if you remove subsidy and you increase spendings for the National Assembly, you increase spendings in terms of housing for senior public officers, then there is a problem. When you wake up in the morning and you hear about the better edu situation, over half a billion naira transferred into private accounts, authorized by the auditor, the accountant general of the Federation, that's definitely going to make you revved up. You're going to be angry with that situation. However, if you cut down the cost of governance in this sense, you find these levels of graft, you win the trust. And if you win the trust, you can govern. And if you can govern, then we start to see the policy effects of this particular macroeconomic policies that you're enacted generate positive outcomes in the next 18 to 24 months. However, now people have lost hope because of the news that they're seeing. And to be honest, they have every right to be angry.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Basil Abia, co-founder of Very Africa Abuja. On that note, we're going to end this session, and I really do appreciate your opinion, especially on the economic issues. And you did have some spot-on suggestions, and I do hope that the government will, tighten their seatbelts and do something better so as to expect better results. Thank you once again, Basil.
It's a pleasure to be on News Central. Blessings. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. You're still watching VSA, and when we come back, we'll take a detour to Tigray and see how dire the situation there in terms of hunger and famine is. A lot of people have lost their lives. So many people have starved to death. It's not a joke. Do stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on Village Square Africa. Now, we have looked into the economic situation in Nigeria. And of course, in a very short time, we're going to be looking at the dire hunger situation in Tigray, but not without taking a stop at the World Economic Forum, which is an annual meeting to discuss the economy, global economy, and ways to improve or boost the economy across the globe. These is where world leaders gather, leaders in different spheres gather. And it's been on for quite some days, and very key key issues have been raised. Now, before the break, we saw Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala speaking at the forum. Now, this forum is held in Davos, Switzerland, and they're currently still ongoing. Let's take a quick look at what's happening there, and then we'll be back to continue.
Canada, but really, I think this applies to the whole world. As we build our economic policies, whether they are trade policies or investment attraction policies or industrial policies, at the end of the day, the question we have to ask ourselves is, will this make the life of the people I represent better? Will it create great jobs that people can build a life on and have hope and optimism for the future with?
Thank you so much, Christia. Moving over to Valdis Dombrovskis, Vice President of the EU Commission, responsible for trade and investments. EU is a superpower when it comes to trade. I think the single market is still the largest market in the world. Some used to say it's a superpower without superpowers, but I think you're shown some more superpowers lately. You've become a little bit more assertive, also on level playing fields, and there's like a hobby for some people to write off the EU. Like 2012, it was like the currency was written off. It's still the second most important currency in the world. It's also Greece was going to go bust. Now it is the fastest growing economy in Europe. So you have also good results to show. But what is the role of the EU in securing and shaping a trade system and trade that will contribute to recovering global growth?
Thank you, Jorge. Good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, EU is a world trading superpower. We are the largest trading bloc in the world, also having one of the most comprehensive network of free trade agreements in the world. So for the EU, clearly there is a lot of stake when we discuss global trading system. So from EU side, we are obviously committed and working to preserve rules-based multilateral trading system. Clearly, geopolitical context is changing. It's becoming much more conflictual, and also the risk of economic fragmentation is there. But clearly, that would come at substantial economic cost. There are estimates of the International Monetary Fund is that if this economic fragmentation would take place globally, so trade focusing within geopolitical blocks, that would have an effect on the world economy, which would be equivalent of taking Germany's and France's combined GDP out of the world economy, and effect unevenly distributed, with developing countries most negatively affected. So also from that point of view, clearly it's important to preserve this multilateral system. At the same time, it's also visible that there is a paradigm shift from efficiency to resilience. So there's much more talk about economic security, economic resilience, and so on and so forth. So.
Well, of course, the World Economic Forum is still ongoing, and here at News Central, we'll definitely be giving you more update as the event unfolds. We really want to know what the plans are for the economy, especially in the new year. But anyways, back to Village Square Africa now. The situation in Tigray is dire, with officials warning that the region is on the brink of a famine not seen since 1984. Now, this is a stark reminder of the devastating impact of conflict, drought, and flooding on vulnerable populations. It is crucial for the international community to take action to prevent further suffering and loss of life. Now, that's not to say that lives have not been lost, because unfortunately, more than 200 people have starved to death. Another 16 have died in nearby Adware town as well. However, the central government in Addis Ababa denies famine is looming and says it is working to provide aid. Why is that? We don't know yet. We're going to find out. Now, medics and humanitarians say that aid is not coming fast enough, leaving them helpless to save lives. A little more context. When alleged looting of food aid was uncovered by the World Food Programme and the USAID last spring, they halted aid to Ethiopia for months on end until resuming at a more cautious rate in December. Now, close to 1,500 people reportedly died of starvation during that time in Tigray. And till now, there's still a struggle, to provide humanitarian aid. Now, that said, I'll be joined by my guest today, Seyum Berhe, former Tigray Diaspora Council member, Virginia in the USA. Thank you so much, Mr. Berhe, for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Now, Berhe, we're talking about the dire situation in Tigray, the hunger situation, and we did get to understand that over 200 people have starved to death. And in fact, doctors are complaining that they do not have enough, equipment and facilities to take care of this, especially the sick children who got sick out of, starvation. And even those they treat, they send them back out, and then they still get hungry and still fall sick. So can you just give us an update as to what the current situation in Tigray is and how it's impacting the local population?
That's a great question, and thank you. I do want to share with you that I just got back from Tigray 2 weeks ago. So I am eyewitness to some of these sufferings. Let me touch on the background. History it matters. The Ethiopian leaders have always denied starvation of their own people, starting with Emperor Haile Selassie because of his image, Mengistu Haile Mariam because he wants to subjugate the northern part of the country, and now the Prime Minister denies there is hunger or starvation at all, while he is the cause. Now, yes, women and children are suffering more than anyone, and World Food Programme punished the thieves and the mothers and the children on the same level. Mothers and children did not steal the food. The federal government, the Eritrean government, and partially the Tigrayan government are the ones accused of stealing. And guess who gets punished? The mother with the child, as you can see on the picture. So it's really blaming the victim. This has happened again and again. And I am here to tell you, this is a continuation of the past 3 years of conducted genocide. First, Eritrea and Ethiopian federal government tried to subjugate with blocking everything in and out of Tigray with food and medicine. That didn't work. So they went for air force, drones, and military destruction. Well, that worked, but not finished them. So now they are continuing to block food coming into Tigray. Mothers are suffering. I have seen mothers holding their children who reminded me of the 80s starvation. It's really happening. And by the way, the death toll, this is only in the areas where the provisional government of Tigray controls. Guess what? Almost half of Tigray is under control of Eritrea and the Amhara militias. Therefore, they don't even have information of who else is dying. The place I was born in Tigray, you cannot get there because Eritrea will never let you into the area. So do we know how many people are dying? That's the minimum that you mentioned. So it is destructive. It's man-made, mostly. Yes, nature has something to do with it, but it's man-made. And I might have to say, by design. It's very clear when Prime Minister says, Mengistu was wrong, allowing corridor of food to go to Tigray. I am not going to repeat that mistake. Can you even imagine a prime minister of a country that he claims Tigray is part of Ethiopia to do that? It's really mind-boggling. It is really difficult to understand. What did these mothers and children do? And World Food Programme and the world were able to convince the emperor, Mengistu Haile Mariam, but Isaias and Abiy, not very easy people to be convinced, madam.
Okay, Seyum Berhe, thank you so much for that. And I would like for us to stay on that issue. But very quickly, I would like for us to also have our second guest join us, Sarah Cassidy Seyum, Chief Research Officer at Omna Tigray in Netherlands. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
All right, Sarah, before you joined in, myself and Mr. Berhe here have been talking about the dire situation in Ethiopia. And one thing that we have kind of stayed on is the fact that this situation is so dire, but at the same time, the leaders are trying to evade the situation, trying to deny that there is a hunger situation in Ethiopia. So if that is the situation, we're seeing the leaders trying to deny because they're trying to save their image or save face. And, you know, they always say that you cannot solve a problem that doesn't exist. The first step to solving a problem is to acknowledge that there is a problem. So the international aid cannot come in, you know, humanitarian assistance cannot come in if you do not even accept that there is a problem. So where does that leave Ethiopians at the point?
Yeah, thank you very much for that really important question. I mean, at this point, as Mr. Suyumborha has said, you know, it is a very, very dire crisis. And we're really pleading with the international community to really up the aid that we need in Tigray, just because, you know, 91% of Tigrayans are dependent on aid. And at the moment, as aid is slowly starting to restart, we're only 20% of those who need it are getting it. And nutritional aid has not gone into Tigray. So we really need the world to understand how dire the situation is, and also for them to pressure the Ethiopian government to respond in an appropriate manner, which we know obviously over the last 3 years in the situation in Tigray and the genocidal war that has taken place. It's very hard to expect anything from the Ethiopian government, so we really need that pressure. But that said, there are, you know, grassroots organizations and NGOs on the ground that are trying to respond to the situation. But what that means right now is people who are very dependent on aid are just not receiving it. But we're trying to mobilize, and we're mobilizing, you know, outside of Tigray as well, to try to fund where there is also a large funding gap. So we're trying to make sure that, you know, we try to address some of this from the outside as well, making sure those who need it most are getting the aid, which so far the World Food Program and USAID and the food cluster have really struggled to do.
All right, Sarah, thank you. Let me come back to you, Mr. Berhe. Now, when I was introducing this conversation, I did mention, you know, the little backstory about the looting of food aid that was uncovered by the World Food Program and, of course, USAID some time ago last spring. And because of that, they halted aid to Ethiopia for months on end, and then they now resumed at a more cautious rate. What does this mean for the people of Tigray now? Does it mean that there is not enough? Because we've heard, you know, the complaints from here and there that there's not enough aid getting to Tigray. Does it have anything to do with the fact that, you know, aid was halted because of the looting? And if they have resumed and are still providing aid to Tigray, are all the regions getting this aid, or is it just the major regions? And where does that leave the other more remote areas?
And thank you so much. And respect goes to Omna, Sarah, and the leadership who have been advocating for this so much, and I appreciate that. Many places in Tigray, even if there is enough food going in, will not get there because the roads are closed by Eritrean military and by Amhara military. That's clearly the case. Yes, there is not enough food going in to begin with. I do want to go back to that World Food Program decision to halt food. You know, it's really difficult to understand it. I understand they were frustrated, but they should have punished those who were stealing the food. The mother and child did not. So I want to stress that really clearly. Now, if you go to the Irob region, to the western Eritrea, to Gulamakada, around Zalambesa area, the Eritreans control it. They have also taken everything away. They have stolen the cattle, even the basic traditional and primitive tools for agriculture. So there is no way these people can actually become self-sufficient immediately, because those tools, you cannot plow ground with your hand. It's impossible. The food is not getting there. There is no transportation. The roads are blocked. And this is going to impact Tigray in a long run. Children who are starving, kids are being born underweight, really, really miserable situation that will impact our society for years and years to come. And I'm sorry to say it's by design. Why do I say that? When Taliban actually agrees to have corridor, when Syria and Turkey agrees to have corridor, when Israel and Hamas agrees for corridor, the Ethiopian and Eritrean government cannot even think in humanitarian aspects to let the food get to the starving. It's difficult to explain. And I'm really hoping my camera today, who is in East Africa, can make some change or some positive steps towards Pretoria Agreement. Fundamentally, that's where the problem is.
Right.
The Ethiopian and Eritrean government are not abiding by that agreement.
Okay. Very quickly, Sarah, still talking about the aid that has been sent to Ethiopia, Tigray especially, how can, I would say political leaders now, but they're still living in denial. But that said, how can they ensure that the funds that are sent or the aid that is sent is not diverted, so we don't have a repeat of a situation of looting this aid and then, the UFP finding out or the USAID finding out and then halting the aid as well?
Course, is at the root of the situation in terms of looking at it from an international perspective. But we also have to remember the context of this and that food looting, occurs in a lot of places and aid isn't necessarily suspended. And this case in Tigray and Ethiopia at large, it was. But what's important here is to make sure that there are mechanisms, right? There are organizations working on the ground that know who needs what, and know which families aren't receiving the aid when it's diverted. So there are key people, whether that's in the interim administration or WFP or USAID people on the ground, who can coordinate this and make sure those who need the aid are getting the aid. There are ways to do this. There are organizations that are working who also they should partner with and to make sure that aid is getting there. It is not an impossible task.
Right.
There are organizations that are trying to do it on the ground right now, but they need the support and funding from these larger organizations who have a mandate.
All right.
Those who are most in need and who are not doing it.
Okay, very important. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I also want to say thank you to Sayum, Sarah Kassidi Sayum, Chief Research Officer at Omna Tigray, Netherlands, and of course, Sayum Berhe, former Tigray Diaspora Council member, Virginia, USA. Thank you so much for joining us on VSA and sharing your thoughts. This is where we call it a wrap. All right, very quickly, we're going to head back to the economic forum currently going on in Davos. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is speaking again, and we really need to find out what she's having to say. This has been VSA. My name is Blessings Mosugu.